Hello, and welcome to the OPC Podcast Series. I'm Caroline, Occupational Therapist. This is the audio accompaniment to Chapter 1 of the Occupational Performance Coaching Manual published by Routledge. There could be many different reasons why you've accessed this manual. Are you a new graduate interested in developing skills in working with clients, or an old-timer who's curious to refresh your skill set? Perhaps you're someone who has already done training in occupational performance coaching. In this podcast, we will cover the background to occupational performance coaching, which we will call OPC for short. OPC is an approach to supporting people with disabilities to achieve their personal goals in life. It's used by occupational therapists and other allied health professionals working in rehabilitation. At its core, OPC is about connecting with clients, mostly adults, to build a therapeutic relationship in which the client's role as a decision maker and change agent is at the forefront. OPC provides the basis for a conversation in which therapists, with openness, curiosity, and compassion, coach participants to identify goals and actions that move them closer to achieving their goals. Dr. Fiona Graham is the occupational therapist who, along with her PhD supervisors, Sylvia Rogers and Ginny Ziviani, first developed OPC. This podcast will give you some insights into their journey of questioning and discovery, which led to the development of this approach. We'll find out how Fee has reflected through her clinical stories and grappled with professional crises and how these processes have shaped OPC. This podcast is also a celebration of the insights, actions, and decisions which have allowed OPC to evolve, offering clinicians a means of working with clients motivated to make meaningful changes. I'm sitting with Fee in her living room. Here we are drinking a cup of tea to warm us on this chilly day. Hi, Fee.
Hi, Caroline.
Fee, help me set the scene for listeners here. Why does the background story for OPC need to be told?
Well, I've been running a lot of training workshops on OPC over the last few years. And I found that when I share some of my personal aha moments, including some of my times of insecurity and doubt as a professional, it does seem to resonate with people and help people to connect with some of the concepts in OPC.
Well, listeners, prepare for a story. Fee, take us back to the beginning. Why does your husband sometimes teasingly call you Thomas?
Well, this is a bit of a secret that not many people know, but it's because I test all my speeches on my husband. He's a pretty tough crowd, and so if they work on him, I figure that they're going to work for the audience. And I've used this story a few times where I share with the audience how similar to Thomas the Tank Engine I am. You know the old English stories of the little trains that can talk and have these different personalities, and the central character is Thomas the Tank Engine. And one of the things about Thomas is that he strives to be a really useful little engine, and that the station master approves that he was useful for the day. And I am alarmingly like Thomas in this regard.
Oh, how so?
Yeah, I think I'm beginning to sort of see that a lot of the choices that I've made in life are really related to how useful I can be to others. Serving others is a pretty strong value that I've picked up somewhere along the way, and it's this drive that ultimately led me to developing OPC. I remember early in my career I was so concerned about whether I was useful or not, or a lot of this got tied up with was I competent enough as an OT. Even as I moved later in my career, as I moved into pediatrics, I was still pretty focused on memorising the scripts of what it meant to be a good OT. What the rules were, what were the assessments, the unspoken rules of the profession. And making sure I was doing what the senior OTs around me were doing, using the assessments that most people use, working on the types of goals most OTs seem to be working on, writing reports that conveyed my expertise.
So you had become quite an expert.
in OT, would you say?
I'm never very comfortable with that word expert, but I guess, in terms of mimicking those around me and doing what people high standing around me seem to be doing, I guess I was, I was becoming competent at those tasks anyway.
Perhaps, listener, this is a familiar feeling. Fi went on to reflect her growing sense of disquiet as the traditions of assessing client deficits seemed at odds with being really useful to her clients by working on the things that were meaningful to them.
I did spend quite a lot of time assessing people and making sure that I wrote very thorough and professional looking reports that conveyed the fullness of the picture as I was seeing it and as an occupational therapist.
So you were spending a lot of time looking at the deficits, or tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that certainly was the tradition at the time, was to have, particularly in paediatrics, in adult, particularly in adult head injury work that I did, was that we had a really comprehensive understanding of the person's impairments and deficits. And when I look back on the way that I negotiated with people about what outcomes were important to them, I probably influenced that conversation quite a lot to make sure that they were the kind of outcomes that I felt like I could make an impact on. So whether they were meaningful or not, they were meaningful in terms of meeting my professional obligations, but I didn't really ask the right questions to find out if they were really meaningful to the families.
And this realization, how did it impact, or how did it change the way you began working with families?
Well, alongside a growing sense of trust in myself to let go of control of the way that those kind of goal-setting conversations were happening. And so what changed was I started to basically have that conversation with families, and right from the start of therapy, and saying, so what's most important for you now? I did use the COPM, and actually that was the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, and that's been around for a really long time now, and it's a remarkably flexible and simple tool to use. But as an outcome measure, as a clinician, it does really quantify how effective that we're being. So I started to have these more expansive conversations with people about what was really important to them, and at the same time I started to measure it really carefully. So not only did the type of goals expand, but it became really in my face about how useful I was being as a clinician. So that really hit deep.
The usefulness, and you felt like using the COPM was measuring the change that you were having?
Yeah, because I started to think, well, I'm so worried, or so, I was so anxious that I might not be being useful. And I thought, wow, if I use the COPM, then I will know that I'm being useful, and it will help me to focus on occupations instead of all these little splinter components that, were just almost like ritualized traditions of what OTs around me did.
Right. And before, did you feel like your outcomes were met before?
Parents always used to say quite woolly things about whether things were better or not at home as well, I remember. And it was probably because my goals were kind of woolly with them in terms of what they wanted to see differently at home. Okay. So I had this sort of opaque, kind of fuzzy, I think it helped. It seemed to help a little bit. Everyone seems happy. The child's handwriting is definitely better, and I know that they can catch the ball a lot better, or whatever it was that there was their more activity level goal. But whether things were really happening differently for them across home, school, community, environments that they engaged in life in, I couldn't really be sure.
And in that more of an expert role that you were playing before, do you feel that the parents were actually doing the recommendations that you gave them, or following the activities you suggested for home?
Well, I think early on I probably pretty much assumed that they were, because they were so expert and they were so right and they were so, educationally informed.
And you spent a lot of time writing those home programs?
And I was under 25 at the time, so I could be forgiven for a little naivety and all of that. I guess I developed a growing suspicion that the home programs weren't really being done, or being done to a level that I could really imagine that they're going to be impacting on this child's, body structure, function systems. There wasn't enough rehearsal. There wasn't enough sort of exposure, repetition. For example, the classic kind of animal walks down to the bedroom at night to sort of strengthen that shoulder girdle and all of that. And they'd say, oh, yeah, we did that a couple of times, And I was like, a couple of times. This kid needs to work it if they're going to be getting any changes there, and that it's really going to make an impact on their shoulder stability.
So once you stopped giving your home programs and telling parents what they should be doing, what happened?
I do remember one day having a conversation with my supervisor at that time, and saying, and I must admit, in a peak of frustration, saying that I've got no idea if these strategies even work, because I've got no confidence that anybody's doing them, not with any amount of, consistency.
What did she say?
She said she was quite a straight talker, Karina, and she said, well, why don't you ask them what they think would work better?
That's a good question. How did that work out?
I did definitely go back and start asking them, and but I remember there was silence while they thought about that. Yeah, then they kind of came up with something different, a different way of going about things to what they normally did.
And how did you proceed from that answer?
I guess it just kind of evolved into a sort of a lot of listening. A conversation with a lot of listening and a lot of reflection and another question. And sometimes a bit of advice, a bit of information.
So OPC allows for giving them some information?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah, even today. So OPC's evolved quite a lot since that time of those early kind of let's start with asking question days. But even now I often find, but not always, at some stage in a coaching conversation, as a pediatric rehab therapist, there's some information that I know because of my training, because of my length of time working with this client group. Some information is useful to the family, and I know that it's useful because I ask them, what was useful about that for you, or does that sound like something that could be useful to you? And sometimes they say no,
right?
Sometimes it's not useful, and sometimes they say yes.
Okay, so giving them that option then.
I think probably my hit rate of being useful with that sort of information is a lot higher now, because before we get to that point of me sharing some of what I know, I've asked questions for the client to share a huge amount about what they already know, and even to come to some new insights, some new knowledge through the process of that reflection and talking that I've given them the opportunity to do. So for one thing, I need to give information far less than what I used to give information, and when I do, it tends to be a lot more accurate to what they need to know, because they basically let me know what they need to know.
Right.
Quite explicitly, they've made a choice about that. So so what I say is more relevant. I think a lot of what I used to sort of say and dish out with my fabulous handouts and home programs, they didn't need to know.
Okay.
And it wasn't helpful, which is why they didn't do it. So there is a real expertise in that asking of a useful question. And I'm really drawing on, as an occupational therapist, I'm seeing it as my skills in occupational analysis and thinking about the the task and sometimes the wide occupation that they're telling me about, and what are some of the conditions around that might be, relevant to explore together. But I'm a little bit hesitant about that word guide. I mean, there is definitely an element of guide, but it's much more of a partnership of exploring together.
Okay.
I never know what's around the next corner.
Right.
So I'm not that kind of guide that has already trod that mountain path a million times and knows all the sights that are coming up, and I can let the person wow at what they see. And I knew that they were going to see that. I don't know what they're going to see.
Okay. Oh, so that means you've let go of the control that you were talking about at the beginning, or?
It's been a huge part of my journey as a health professional, and it's a core attribute of somebody using OPC is an ability to let go of control. Not that there are no control, like OPC is not a sort of free for all. So that's where I'm honest about that element of guidance being in there, but certainly a lot less controlling than what I see as usual care, even today.
That can be scary for a therapist.
Oh my goodness, incredibly scary.
Fee shared with me a moment in her career when the fear of not knowing what to do really struck, as she gave the client more control over the direction of therapy.
I remember this one client, and it was right at that time we were just talking about, Caroline, around embracing what's really important to families right now as the starting point, and not kind of boxing that in and cajoling it into some kind of nice answer that I was going to feel really comfortable with. And such was my panic, actually, that I can't even tell you many of the details of what the goal were, but was and how we proceeded from there. But so this mum with this little boy, a really highly dyspraxic, learning disability, a bit of ADHD little boy, and I had this goal for him, and I remember sitting there. I remember sitting at the desk, and I had the COPM open, and I was ready to write down the occupations that were most important to them. And then I just remember this do-doof, do-doof, do-doof sort of sound.
Your heartbeat?
It might have been a heartbeat, or the blood pounding in my ears as the blood rushed to my head. And I was just sitting there, and sort of time seemed to stand still, and I just thought, I have got no idea how to solve this problem. I've got no idea what to do.
What did you do? Or what did you say?
Well, I sat with it, and I noticed the feeling, and that was probably the biggest change. Yeah. I just sat with it and noticed the feeling.
And Mum was there with you?
Mum and Dad, Mum and the child were there. They gave no indication they had any idea of what was going on for me inside my head. Although I don't remember, massive social awkwardness or anything, and with them, so they probably didn't particularly pick up, and maybe time didn't quite go so slowly as what it seemed to be going inside my head. But yeah, sat with that feeling instead of staying, that's not kind of thing that OTs do, so is that work? Self-care or leisure? Didn't try and sort of...
Didn't fit into a box?
I didn't try and fit it into a box. I sat with that feeling, and it passed.
Okay.
It passed over. And we started a conversation from there about, what we knew about how the child was going with this situation, and what we could do differently.
So it was a partnership.
Exploring, right. Exploring what some of the options were and what was known already.
Right. What would work for her.
Building on what was known. Starting to work out what could work for this mum.
Fee describes the changes she noticed in her clients as she began using OPC and measuring these changes very specifically using the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, or COPM as it's known. The COPM is an outcome measure of clients' perception of how well they perform the everyday occupations that are important to them. The therapist interviews the client about the life situations that they want to resolve. The situation might be a task like brushing teeth or a routine like getting ready for work. Each situation is then rated by the client on a scale from 1 to 10 for how well they do it and how satisfied they are with how they do it. The COPM was developed by occupational therapists, but is now used by many professions to measure change that matters to clients in daily life situations. Listen on to find out what Fee found as she used the COPM and how it confronted her with her worst fears.
In the COPM, we'd often be looking for changes of 1 to 3, I know that the official kind of clinically significant level of change is 2. Obviously, that differs a lot for different individuals. But yeah, small changes. That's what I was seeing initially.
Right.
As I started in the COPM, I was like, okay, so measuring change in the environment. And I was like, oh no, it's true. I'm not actually useful. Was my initial experience. That's what families were telling me back. I would not tell them what they had rated things on initially, and just say, so how are things going with that morning routine, or that being organised for getting out of the house, or getting to sleep, or whatever the occupations were. And we're looking at often maybe squeak in with a 2 or maybe a 3, but sometimes 1. Sometimes it went backwards. Sometimes, or sometimes the satisfaction was higher, but the performance hadn't actually changed.
Okay.
Fee could have stopped measuring clients' progress so specifically, stop using the COPM, or she could have gone back to controlling the kinds of goals she worked on with clients. But she didn't.
And, at the same time, I took that cue from my supervisor around just ask them what they think that would work, and that really seemed to go somewhere. And I did find that when they came up with ideas that they thought might work, they tended to do them.
So there was follow through in there.
There was follow through, and so sometimes I agreed with their ideas and sometimes I didn't. But at least then, because they'd done them, then they had something to learn from.
Right. Okay.
Whereas half-heartedly doing something that the therapist had recommended,
So it goes back to what you were saying about their sense of agency.
That's right, a sense of agency around taking action. And the other thing, of course, that they do is they spontaneously do more of it and do it in other places. And and that's where the development of the family's insight, rather than being taught some, procedural knowledge, because they'd had an insight about it, they could see the patterns of how the child engaged and how where the child was getting caught up with the activities, or the impact of the way that they or someone else engaged with the child, and what was a more effective way of supporting them, what environmental conditions made a difference.
Fee goes on to describe the effect she felt these kinds of responses from clients had on the COPM scores.
And that's when we started to see more like 7, it would be rare that we would see change scores of, say, less than 5.
Wow.
5, 7 points on the COPM. That kind of became the norm.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So
what happened to your caseload then?
Ooh.
Or how many sessions?
That's a good question. Yeah, there were changes in the caseload. So a few things happened. So there was a bit of that thing of people wanting to exit early.
Mm-hmm. Because they felt that their goals were met?
Yeah, the goals were met, and that they knew how to handle the situation now. So they didn't kind of need to be coming back to the therapy. They were...
OPC gave them the ability to take charge or figuring it out for themselves, you think?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
Self-managed, sometimes people use that terminology. They were empowered, as you said before, to manage the situation with the child and support the child's learning, on their own, yeah. And the other thing that impacted my caseload was people wanted to be seen less often, because they actually had some solid work to do over the time before we met next, to experiment with this, idea that we talked about. And often when it came down to those conversations, so when were you thinking when would be a good time to do this strategy? this thing that you've come up with. And when they thought about it, like, oh, well, that's right, well, we're going away to grandma's for half of the weekend, and then we've got soccer on Monday night, and we've got a play date on Tuesday, and I work late on Thursdays and Fridays, and they run after school care, etc. So actually, when they looked at their week, they were like, oh, actually, I'm not actually going to. I've got one window in 5 days or 9 days time where I'm going to be able to do that.
Right. Okay.
With the child, which was quite enlightening in itself for me around what many people's family routines are like. So they wanted to be seen fortnightly quite often, or even 3 weeks. So my caseload grew larger. I had a larger number, but I kind of got through cases more quickly.
So you're still useful.
I was still useful, in fact, possibly more useful. Despite them wanting to be discharged early. But I had a much larger caseload because I wasn't seeing them weekly.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And tell me, how did your OT colleagues feel about OPC at that time?
Yeah, they asked me some really tough questions, actually, my colleagues. I think there might have been an element of setting off some of their own anxiety with seeing me not following the scripts now.
Right, okay. Yeah.
For what we were trained, we've been trained what was OT in that context, and they questioned whether why wasn't the child there, because often the parents would say, I really just need a chance to be able to talk really freely about what's going on at home without my child here. So often I was seeing parents without children present, and they were sort of seeing me talking with families a lot, and they're like, shouldn't, are you being a psychologist here with this? Are you doing psychology now, or are you doing OT?
Okay.
And, I'll sort of say, well, I mean, it's the morning, we're working on the morning routine, but this home is in complete chaos, and it's actually more to do with how the parent structures the environment than how the child, than anything I'm going to be able to do with the child, whether that this child is able to get through the morning routine.
You're still focusing on the occupation.
It was very much, that's always been my anchor.
Right.
Like, is this an occupation that we're working on? And sometimes people raise things that aren't occupations, and that's where I really clearly feel, no, I'd really recommend that you go and see the clinical psychologists around this sort of thing. But my colleagues wondered if I should be referring many of my families to mental health services if they had so much difficulty with, their parenting skills, or, many of them had been through the Triple P program, which is the local kind of population level parenting course. And, but anyway, they felt that if I was doing talking then, and it was challenges that the parents had, then they should be going to the mental health services.
So they felt that it wasn't OT what you were doing, you think?
They were definitely questioning it.
Okay. So OPC has been on quite a journey. It's developed, and where are you at now? Is it finished? Is it what's happening? Obviously, there's this book, which is great.
Yeah.
So it's evolved.
Yeah, for sure. So there's some changes into the way that OPC is articulated in the graphics and in the components that are specifically labelled in the graphics. OPC has definitely evolved over time, and a huge stimulus for that has been the training workshops that I've been invited to do around the world over the last sort of 10, 12 years. Fabulous clinicians questioning, exploring ideas and reflecting on their own practice. And they've challenged me, they've questioned me, and as I have had that practice at explaining OPC, it's enabled me to refine the models, and we now also have this an OPC network of advanced trainees, and they're a mix of academic and clinicians who each bring another perspective as well. So some of these these graphics have been published on the OPC website, but otherwise haven't been published and discussed in the literature. So they were brought forward for the first time to outside of a workshop in this book. But I'm sure it will continue to evolve. One of the other major steps that's happened with this book is development of a fidelity measure. So who knows what's going to happen next?
Very exciting. Very exciting. Thank you so much, Fee, for sharing this journey and the background story around OPC. I think we're all looking forward to read the book. Thank you.
No worries. Enjoy.
Thanks, Fee.